Hello again, you sick, twisted weather freaks, and welcome to another fun-filled, action-packed, and intellectually stimulating edition of This Week in Weather. I'm your host and meteorologist DT from WeatherRisk.com, the Colonel of Confusion, the Captain of Catastrophe, the Commander of Chaos. And it's a Saturday morning here at 11 a.m., and it's time to do looking at the weather and see what we can figure out. Lots to talk about here, and this fabulous pattern coming up, pattern change, which is going along pretty much as I anticipated. We have to talk about the mild December here for a bit, talk about three different significant lows, December 17th, December 21, and December 25th, and how they help bring about the pattern change. We'll talk about the pattern amplification, and what does it mean for January. So lots to talk about. Let's get right to it. We're going to start up by taking a look at how mild December has been. Now, it hasn't been as torched in many areas, everything considered. Given the overall pattern, how zonal the flow has been, it hasn't been that much above normal over Minnesota, Iowa, Wisconsin, for example. In fact, if you look at the greens there, that's actually a couple degrees below normal. And then New England, it's also been pretty close to normal. And even the Mid-Atlantic states, you're talking a degree or two above normal, not much here. The western coast, the Rockies have been pretty warm. The deep south, the Tennessee Valley has been warm. But the other areas, just slightly above normal. It really hasn't been that much of a blowtorch, everything considered. The pattern has looked quite warm, but the actual temperatures have not. Now let's take, this is the jet stream here at 250 millibars. And this goes back to late November here. And what I wanted to point out was this jet streak here. Do you see this jet streak here? Now this is as of, you can see, 29 November through early December. So this feature has come ripping across the Pacific Ocean, and that's what caused all this storminess that hit California. Now here's December 4th, December 8th, and look where the feature is already. Ripping across the ocean. If you look at that, it's 70, 80, 90 knots up in this area right in here. As you can see, very powerful. And, of course, that has slammed to the west coast here over the last few days. So I wanted to show you we have a very strong jet. I talked about this in the last update. It's been a while since I did the last update because of working on the new website, but that was definitely something we talked about. And let's take a quick look at the MJO here. Now, the MJO, back in November, we can know was very cold and very strong. Now, if we take a look here when this started, this is November 8th. You see this right in here, November 9th, November 10th, okay? And again, in phase 8, that's cold, as you can see right in here. In November, that's cold. Phase 1 in November is cold. Phase 2 in November is cold. By the time we got to phase 3, the end of the month, that was more of a neutral. And then as we moved into December, phase 4, 5, and 6 are all strong signals in December for mild weather patterns. Now what's happened is that lately the MJO has now collapsed. You see how it's turned into the circle of death here in the neutral zone? And now it's actually moved into there. This is not a projection. So as long as it's weakened now and moved into the neutral zone, that's going to allow other factors in the atmosphere to take over. And if we look at the MJO model plots from the European here, and I'll use them because they're the best models for the MJO, out to January 9th, January 10th, notice what they do here. The MJO goes into the circle of death, or the neutral zone as I call it, and then it comes out a little bit and it circles around again by early January, back into phase 7. And the same thing here, in here, then very weak along, coming out like that. This is a weak MJO, so it means that it's not going to have a big impact on the overall pattern or the pattern change coming up. So we can now disregard the MJO for a while. Let's take a look at the December 17th event. All right, now this is the actual map here of the this is from the GFS model, but this is initialized here from early on Saturday morning. And of course, we can see our trough right here, very noticeable. There's our big ridge, and then that's the big system which has been hitting New England and brought the rain and the snow, the big coastal storm, the fourth one of the season, the third nor'easter. And then here's the next piece of energy coming in this way. Right? All right, so that's the actual map. Now, what the GFS does is the GFS takes this system coming out here and it puts it through this way into the Great Lakes, and we have the next system now coming down here. You can see that. All right, and this is for December 16th. And then finally, as we go to the 17th, we have the energy is very weak on the GFS, as you can see right in here. It doesn't do much at all. Now this energy is very strong. The Pacific jet is still crashing in here, so California gets hit with another big rain. And we do have a bit of an omega ridge here, and that's providing some cold air into the Great Lakes of the Northeast. Not a lot, but some. And the problem here is that the GFS is mishandling this feature. And as a result, it has a much different solution here and a much weaker system for the 17th and the 21st. Now, let me clear up my map here. This is the GFS here for the next system, and because the GFS, this is on the 20th, because the GFS is weaker here, oops, wrong arrow, before the week here, this system goes up further to the northwest and not to the south. So that's why that's important. This is the feature which sets up December 21. Okay, that's called the 50-50 low because it's over southeastern Canada. And we can see it very nicely here. Now, this is the European model. Now, look what the European model is doing here for the 18th. This is the system coming through in the 17th. You look how much stronger this is here. Wow. Look at that. Okay, there's the next system coming southward, and here the next one even here. So this is the nice big system right here up in New England. And it's a rainstorm for the East Coast. It's maybe some snow for the Great Lakes and the upper Midwest, but it's mostly a rainstorm for the Ohio Valley and for the East Coast. But it moves into Canada, and it sits there, and it pulls down the cold air. Now, this is the... let's see, this is the GFS from early this morning, and you can see for the 22nd, it has a weak low moving off the coast in this direction like this, and it pulls down some colder air, and there might be some snow in the mid-Atlantic states from it. But it's a pretty weak system. Now, this is the European model, and again, notice here how much stronger this system is, the one on the 17th that moves up into southeastern Canada. And as a result, look at the high is much stronger here, and we're getting a lot more cold air coming southward. So when this system comes in, it has to stay south. All right? This system keeps this system south. Got it? That's what the 50-50 low does. Now let's take a look at the December 21st event. Now that system is coming westward from the west coast. We can see it here. Oops. This is the system here. And again, here's our 50-50 low with southeastern Canada. So that keeps the cold air, there's the high, in place. And we have a nice cold air damming here, nice signature, and you can see the rain snow line is along the Virginia-North Carolina border. There's the precipitation breaking out very nicely. And the European shows a decent winter storm. Now, the pattern is not great for an overall winter storm here. The cold air temperatures are marginal. So if that low stays over southeastern Canada, we could get a decent snow in the Mid-Atlantic region over some area. But it's marginal. The only thing which is making this happen is that low over southeastern Canada. That feature disappears, it breaks down. This is a rainstorm, folks. So if it holds on, then we can see, and we can sure there's the European. We can see it very nicely, sure enough, with the low here. And here's our rain snow line over Norfolk, or Norfolk and Richmond. And this is a pretty good snow event if that low stays in place. Okay. And here's the updated 12Z GFS. This is the high resolution here on Saturday afternoon. And notice that it's got a pretty weak system. That's because the GFS doesn't handle southern swing systems here. It has a weak low here, a weak low here. But there's our 50-50 low. So even the high resolution GFS is seeing this system. Only the operational GFS is not, which is one of the reasons why the operational GFS past 72 or 84 hours is a piece of crap. Now the GFS moves it off the coast here on the evening of the 20th to 21st, and it's developing nicely off the coast. And then, and now this is what the European is doing. We can see the European doing this as we go out to day 10. There's the next. This is our next system coming up here. Now here's that low for December 21st. It's now a nice storm here, and what it does is it forces the pattern to buckle. And here's the next system coming in. We're getting a ridge forming up here. We're getting some cold air coming southward. Look at the high here, folks. Very nice. And again, this system is keeping the cold air in place. Now, the cold air is still plunging south a little bit, but, and again, the pattern isn't great. It's still a lot of Pacific air, but it's beginning to change here by the time we get towards Christmas. Let's take a look at indices. The P&A, everything is warm. It looks warm. You can see that. The WPO is warm, positive. The EPO is warm. Begins to go towards neutral by the end of the period, December 25th. The NAO is positive. Begins to go neutral here by the end of the period. The P&A is positive. But it's a different type of P&A pattern. It's a very broad P&A pattern, the ridge here. We're not getting a sharp ridge, which is pulling down cold air. It's very broad and wide, and that means mostly Pacific air, not cold air. This is the Canadian model as of the 22nd. Notice it shows the pattern amplifying nicely. The polar vortex, of course, is still way to the north, as it should be, because we're just entering the pattern change now. But we can see our polar jet here and the subtropical jet here, and the Canadian has a piece of energy there over California and Arizona, which might be the Christmas Day event. The GFS is much weaker with this, showing a much more blah pattern, taking longer to build the colder pattern here. And again, it's because the GFS is a piece of crap. We can see that very clearly. It's much weaker than any other ensembles. Let's take a look at the 25th event. Now, this is the GFS ensemble from yesterday. It's very much more bullish, as you can see. It has a much bigger ridge. It shows heights rising towards Quebec and Greenland, and has a deep trough here over the eastern United States, and clearly indicates some sort of storm on the mid-Atlantic coast in some capacity or another. Now, if we look at the high-resolution GFS, which just came out Saturday afternoon, right now, here on Saturday, excuse me, we can see, and they call it my markers, we can see it very nicely. There's the system here, and we have a ridging, a cold air damming here. There's another low in this area. And again, this is just to show you the system is potentially building. I don't know if this solution is correct. I don't know if it's going to go up the Appalachians or on the East Coast. I don't know that yet. But there's going to be something here for Christmas Eve, and I believe that strongly. And there's the next system coming into Oregon and Idaho, by the way, if you can notice it. And this is the CFS here, week 3 and week 4. I posted this yesterday on the Facebook page. You can clearly see that the EPO is beginning to build in here. The PNA is building on the West Coast. And then in week 4, we have a monster negative EPO and a West Coast ridge that causes a huge jet stream amplification. The Arctic Oscillation is still negative, and now we begin to see some height rises over the NAO. So the pattern continues to evolve, but now we're talking the first week of January before it gets really cold in the eastern United States. So you have to keep that in mind. Alrighty, let me clear this out. And this is the European from yesterday, showing how positive, how in terms of cold weather, the pattern is looking. The European ensemble is supporting the CFS here very nicely. We have a big Aleutian low. We're seeing the EPO building into Alaska now and the Western Arctic Circle. The polar vortex is still way to the north because we don't have a negative NAO yet. It looks like it's trying to go towards neutral and negative, but we don't have it by Christmas time. Now, this is the European ensembles from this morning, and we can clearly see Christmas morning something of some significance here, right in this area. This is notice the polar jet's coming in here. It's phasing with the subtropical jet. There's obviously some sort of low in this area right in here. Notice the heights are building in here towards Greenland. So again, a pretty promising looking pattern for somebody in the eastern United States on Christmas Day. Now, if we look at the GFS at 312 hours out, which will take us I guess into past Christmas or close to Christmas, we can see that the GFS is fairly weaker with the pattern amplification. It has a weak ridge on the west coast, moderate ridge on the west coast. There's no polar vortex in North America. We are seeing the heights beginning to rise over Quebec and Greenland, so that's a good sign. And it's a seasonally cold pattern here. It's not brutally cold, it's seasonally cold. And both polar vortexes are over the Bering Sea and over Scandinavia. So not a great pattern, but a pattern that's developing, and we can see that quite nicely here. Now, this is the CFS here, which is, excuse me, this is the Canadian, which is a bit more aggressive here. Now, this is the Canadian for the 26th, and we can see the bridge is really exploding up in western Canada. The vortex is beginning to drop southward. We have the polar jet coming as far south as Chicago and New England, and the subtropical jet. Very promising looking pattern here. This is the European ensemble. This is for 24th and 28th, and again, this is a much more amplified pattern. A colder pattern developing everywhere, some sort of deep trough here over the Midwest, no doubt about that, and the heights are rising over Greenland. The the GFS ensembles now as go further out in time, almost out to day 14. It finally begins to catch onto the pattern. Bigger ridge on the west coast, definitely a three-way pattern here. The model is hinting at some sort of polar vortex developing. And this is the 360-hour European model. Very strong ridge on the west coast, as you can see. The heights are beginning to build in towards Greenland. Amplified pattern. Not the severely cold pattern, not yet. Close, getting colder, but not brutally cold yet by any stretch of the imagination. And finally, the Canadian by 300 hours out, also very amplified. This is a very cold pattern as well as we go towards. And finally, this is the high-resolution GFS model, and by the 28th, it has another big storm over the southeast. And look how cold the pattern is here. I don't know if it's going to be this cold, but it shows the general trend here, the high-resolution GFS. Here's the CFS model. Look at this for the going late December to January. Look how amplified this pattern is. Wow. We can see the change here on the CFS, how the ridge really amplifies and in the 21 to 25 day time frame. Again, late going from December into January. And we can see it, and a lot of moisture up and down the East Coast, as you can see, also promising, and temperatures also look much colder, as you can see. Not brutally cold, just colder and closer to normal, and maybe a little bit below normal as we go into the first week of January. This is meteorologist DT from weatherist.com. I'll talk to you soon.